All right, guys. So I want to talk real quick about Trump's plan to privatize the U.S. Postal Service because this is simultaneously going to be one of the most overlooked and comically corrupt aspects of U.S. policy over the last couple of years. So I want to go ahead and start off with this short little video here where Trump was asked about the USPS, and here was his response, and then I'll give you guys a little bit more background information on what's going on here.
Billions.
Well, there is talk about the Postal Service being taken private. You do know that. Not the worst idea I've ever heard. It really isn't. You know, it's a lot different today with between Amazon and UPS and FedEx and all the things that you didn't have. But there is talk about that. It's an idea that a lot of people have liked for a long time. We're looking at it. I think we're looking at that along with a lot of us.
Okay, he says, we're looking at that. You know, it's not a bad idea. A lot of people have been talking about this and pushing for it for a long time. Not true, okay? That's just simply not true. The USPS has a pretty solid approval rating, and don't know many average Americans that are calling for it to be privatized. And we got a little bit more background information on this, but before we continue, I just want to make something clear. The core critique of Trump and of Louis DeJoy, his nominee that was put in place under his previous administration, the Postmaster General, who has been trying to destroy the USPS for years now, continuing even under the Biden administration as well, by the way. The core critique that they have of the USPS is that it's not profitable, okay? It's called the U.S. Postal Service for a reason. It's not supposed to be profitable, right? It's supposed to function as a public service. One of the main benefits of the USPS and having it not be a for-profit enterprise is that they deliver everywhere in the US, including to the most far-flung rural areas of the country, that it would not be profitable for a company like Amazon or FedEx or UPS or whatever the case may be to deliver to. So they provide a core function, especially for more rural areas that, ironically tended to vote for Trump, right? But his core critique is that they're not profitable. Okay, well, already we got a problem there because they're not supposed to be profitable. They're supposed to deliver mail to people, right? Now we continue with a little bit more background details on this. Here we have a Washington Post article. Their headline is Trump eyes privatizing the U.S. Postal Service, citing financial losses. Again, just a ridiculous argument at face value. They say Trump has discussed his desire to overhaul the Postal Service at his Mar-a-Lago estate with Howard Lutnick. By the way, this guy Howard Lutnick, who Trump just brought on as his nominee for Commerce Secretary and who's also the co-chair of his presidential transition, this guy is a Wall Street billionaire. Okay, that's who this guy is. This is who Trump is filling his administration with. So much for draining the swamp, right? Instead, we are bringing the swampiest of swamp creatures into this administration, more billionaires, more wealthy people than any other previous administration in history. We're going to fill the administration with swamp creatures to the detriment of average working class people and to the benefit of Wall Street executives like Howard Lutnick, right? But they continue. They say earlier this month, Trump also convened a group of transition officials to ask for their views on privatizing the agency. Trump's specific plans for overhauling the Postal Service were not immediately clear, but he feuded with the nation's mail carrier as president in 2019, trying to force it to hand over key functions, including rate setting, personnel decisions, labor relations, and managing relationships with its largest clients to the Treasury Department. Now, you'll notice 2019, interesting year, because this was just a year before the 2020 election results, where guess what part of Trump's major strategy for trying to indicate that the election was going to be stolen from him was, right? It was mail-in ballots. Now, that is a major reason why he ramped up this offensive against the USPS, was because of his efforts to deny the results of the 2020 election, even before the election had even taken place. And we'll get to more of that context here in a minute, but a little bit more background here on the USPS. They say the Postal Service is older than the nation itself, founded in 1775 with Benjamin Franklin as its chief, revitalized with free rural delivery at the start of the 20th century, and then transformed into a financially self-sustaining agency in 1970 designed to bind the nation together through the mail. Notice how they said financially self-sustaining agency. So there are some losses that we'll get to here in a minute in terms of like financial losses, like they're not profitable in that sense. But for the most part, the USPS is not even funded through taxpayer dollars. It's funded through like the sale of stamps and other products that people buy when they interact with the US Postal Service, okay? So that's another important point there, that it's not as if by privatizing this, oh, we're going to save the taxpayers billions and billions and billions of dollars. No, they say even through financial challenges wrought by the rise of the internet, the Postal Service has remained one of Americans' most beloved federal agencies, second only to the National Park Service in 2024. So again, one of the most popular, non-controversial agencies that the US government has, okay? Counter to what Trump was saying in that initial clip that, oh, everybody's calling for this to be privatized, right? Everybody hates the USPS. They say, but as congressional Republicans and others in Trump's orbit have clamored in recent weeks for federal cost cutting, the Postal Service has emerged as a prominent target. Again, let's just remind ourselves here, right? I'll circle back around to this. The Pentagon just failed not their sixth, but their seventh audit in a row. Seventh audit in a row. We're talking about $1 trillion agency. 63%. 63% is the percentage that the Pentagon cannot account for of their $4 trillion in assets. Meanwhile, we're talking about cutting the U.S. Postal Service. The U.S. Postal Service, which isn't even a minuscule fraction of the amount that we could cut from the Pentagon budget. Notice how they're not going after that, right? Notice how they're not talking about taxing the wealthy in order to bring in more government revenue. We're talking about cutting social programs. We're talking about cutting some of the only well-liked agencies in the U.S. government. Now, they say that people who will work on the Department of Government Efficiency, this DOGE thing being led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, have also held preliminary conversations about major changes to the Postal Service, said two other people who are familiar with the matter, who also spoke on the condition of anonymity. Now, in terms of some of the consequences, they also say down here that cuts to the Postal Service could upend the trillion-dollar e-commerce industry, hitting small businesses and rural consumers whose businesses and budgets make the agency the shipper of choice. They say Amazon, the Postal Service's largest customer, uses the agency for last-mile delivery between its hulking product fulfillment centers and consumers' homes and businesses. And the agency's universal service obligation, which requires it to deliver mail or parcels, regardless of distance or profitability concerns, means that it is often the only carrier that will deliver to far-flung reaches of the country. So again, you will have people, and keep in mind, it's not just about ordering some random shit off of Amazon, some Christmas present or something. You also have people who require, the USPS to get like their medication, right? To get checks, to get bills in the mail. So we're talking about like actual fucking up of people's lives if you gut this service and try to privatize it and reorient it to be profit-centered. Because notice, delivering to far-flung rural areas of the country, that's not profitable. That's why you have something like the USPS in the first place. Now, we also have this here put out by Common Cause. Their headline is Save the USPS, Fire Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, who again has been spending years under the Trump and Biden administration thoroughly doing his best to try to destroy this entire agency. Now, a little bit more information on that. They say last year, and this is an article that's a few years old here at this point, but they say that DeJoy, who is a GOP megadonor with no previous experience with or adjacent to or anything having to do with the USPS, made headline after headline for his efforts to sabotage the Postal Service. He imposed outrageous restrictions on postal workers, had mailboxes removed by the truckload, and more. They say, and though many of these dangerous directives were reversed by the courts thanks to lawsuits from voting rights groups, we now know that the hamstringing of the USPS was a key part of Trump's plan to undermine vote by mail during the 2020 election. So that's sort of at the origins of this, in terms of why this is all happening, right? Trump even admitted it when he opposed funding the USPS by saying they need that money in order to make the post office work so it can take all these millions and millions of ballots. He just straight up fucking said it. He's just straight up admitting, I want to defund the U.S. Postal Service because I want to make it more difficult for people to vote by mail. They're just openly saying this shit, right? So he puts in place through the board of governors or whatever, whoever chooses these, the postmaster general, the people who fill those positions who get to nominate somebody like Louis DeJoy are typically appointed by the president. But I mean, you put in a guy who is a GOP megadonor, no experience in this, and you basically give him the directive of, I want you to kill this agency because I think it will benefit me in the 2020 election by suppressing people's right to vote. Now, they also say down here, Even now that the election is behind us, DeJoy remains committed to bringing the Postal Service to a grinding halt. He unveiled a 10-year plan that would further slow down first-class mail delivery, reduce post office hours, and raise postage prices. Now, if you want a more thorough breakdown, I won't play it in this video, but I'll link this down below in the description, because More Perfect Union, a few years ago back in 2021, did an entire 5-minute breakdown here of Louis DeJoy's 10-year plan to destroy the post office. Now, again, keep in mind, this has been happening under Trump, it's continuing under Biden, and presumably it's going to escalate again once Trump retakes the White House. But this has been continuing unimpeded throughout the entirety of the 4 years of the Biden administration as well. But go watch that video if you want more information on the full 10-year plan there. Now, I also thought, again, important as we finish off this video, to look at what Marjorie Taylor Greene was saying, right? Because she's going to give us a reasonable, well thought out take here, right? So this was her take just, a couple weeks ago or a week ago or so. She says the United States Postal Service just reported a $9.5 billion loss in fiscal year 2024, adding to its approximately $100 billion in losses since 2007. Now, again, keeping in mind the point that the USPS is not supposed to be for profit, that's not the purpose of it. In fact, it's supposed to lose money in the long run. But putting that aside, she's also just wrong about why this is happening, right? Now, I do sometimes appreciate the Twitter community notes. They can be useful sometimes, and this is one of those times. They say here that the USPS, again, as a reminder, is not funded by tax dollars. It's primarily funded from revenue from its services and selling stamps. They say, additionally, as much as 87% of its losses are due to the PAEA, which was an act that was signed into law in December of 2006. Notice how that lines up with her $100 billion in losses since 2007, right? So this act was signed into law in December of 2006, requiring the USPS to fund employees' pensions decades in advance, which is something that no other agency is required to do, right? So the losses are primarily coming from that. It's not even supposed to be a profitable agency, and yet you have politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about it as if this is a for-profit business. That's not the purpose of this. And again, notice how these same politicians don't bring up shit like this, that we have $1 trillion per year military-industrial complex slush fund that they can't pass an audit for 7 times in a row, and yet the only talk that we hear in Washington, D.C. about the Pentagon budget is how much are we going to raise it next year. That's the only talk that we have about this kind of corruption, this kind of greed, this kind of bloat, this kind of administrative waste, this kind of fraud that's being committed against the American people, right? So, I mean, keep this kind of shit in mind. When we have people like Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, Trump, this other cohort of billionaires that he's putting in his administration, notice how when they have these talks about government efficiency and holding the government accountable for how they're spending taxpayer dollars, notice what they focus on and what they don't focus on, right? I have my doubts that Trump and Elon and Vivek, especially Elon being one of the top recipients of defense contractor money, I have my doubts that they're going to go after the Pentagon budget. Before that, they're going to go after the USPS. Before that, they're going to go after Medicare. They're going to go after Social Security. They're going to go after food stamps. These billionaires are going to slash and tear apart programs that are intended to benefit the bottom 50% of the country in order for them to benefit, right? This is an upward transfer of wealth. The USPS is just one tiny example of that. But this is what Trump's administration is going to look like. It's comically corrupt. And it's right in your face.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying